being told what to do. Wasn't that why he joined the rebellion? Wasn't that why he'd refused to be a soldier? He'd agreed to come on board only if he could freelance. The stone felt a bit clingy, and he had a feeling it did not have his best interests at heart. The sage Calaveras had told him where to find the Sky Ripper, a weapon capable of challenging the gods. Even without its armature, the core would still possess great power. He would go there. The moment he landed the Farfarer, Reynardo had a rare feeling of regret. It's not too late, he thought. He could turn around and sail for Zenobia's island. He frowned. Wait a minute. He didn't want to kill Zenobia, did he? Sure, technically she was the enemy, but they'd been at sword school together. They'd never been lovers, but somehow they'd been closer. She'd told him every secret about herself. Except the biggest one. That she was the Emperor's daughter. No. Kill Zenobia, whispered the stone. Before it's too late. There was something sour in the air. Like the earth had ruptured over something that had been fermenting for a very long time. If only he had a portal onto the Emperor's ship, this would be a short war. The stone hadn't lied about what it could do for him. With each raven he cut down, he felt a jolt of power flowing into his arm. You're weak, whispered the stone. The core will kill you. Are you afraid of it? Don't be ridiculous. It chuckled. But it's unstable. It will poison you so much as carry it, and if you try to use it, it will explode catastrophically. Reynardo did not trust rocks that talked in his head. He went onwards. As he approached the core, the stone became hysterical. No! It's too much power. We will rip a hole in space and time. He had a sudden vision of plunging his gauntlet into the core and dying in anguish. That wasn't his vision, was it? The stone had sent him its darkest fears, hadn't it? He had a sudden impulse to do exactly that. He raised his right fist and plunged it into the core. There was a rush of light. He thought he could hear the stone screaming. And then he passed out. When Reynardo came to, the core was gone. But the Iblis stone was no longer black, but glowing with a blue light. And it was silent. I can't hear you, he sang out, and you. It didn't answer. Ha, he said. He had defeated the demonic gem with the power of his mind. He felt invincible. It was time to attack the Imperial outpost on the Nexus. Take the battle to the enemy. But among the huge crystals, there was also an observatory. A wise man would probably ask the scientists exactly what he had first. How wise was he? As the Farfarer made its way toward the Nexus, Reynardo watched sparks fly out of the core. The Iblis stone sucked them in hungrily. You'd think the stone would want this kind of power, wouldn't it? Thought Reynardo. Well, the scientists would explain it all. This time, Reynardo was sure he'd figured out how to use the core safely. See? He'd trusted his gut, and it had worked out. That's what it meant to be a hero. To ignore the naysayers and the odd-makers, and do what you knew was right, and have it turn out to be the right thing. Well, he wasn't worried. Once he got to the observatory, the scientist toads could explain it. Then he could carry the war into the enemy's camp and destroy them all. He was getting a little bloodthirsty, wasn't he? Building these platforms was so expensive, they'd run out of budget for guardrails. Reynardo had never felt better in his life. Normally, a battle would wear him down and he would need a night's sleep. Now he felt like he could go all night and all day. He felt like people were cheering him on, and he could practically hear their applause as he slew one raven after another. The Imperial fleet was closing in on the rebels, forcing them to come out and fight. Reynardo was itching to bring the fight to the enemy. He had to remind himself not to be too reckless. If he was a weapons engineer, Reynardo would make the cannonballs go much faster. And fire randomly, obviously. The toads at the observatory measured the stone with their occult devices. I fed it the core of Sky Ripper, explained Reynardo. No more Pal souls. But the core is not an unlimited energy source, said one toad. Another said, "There's a feedback loop, you see, which could overload the stone.
The stone doesn't actually feed on souls,
Claimed a third.
but on pain of killing another sentient being. If you can truly be at peace with yourself, it would not overload.
This was all very confusing. At peace? Yes, the mountains were peaceful and quiet, but he now had the power to turn the tides. He should report to the Rebellion Council and prepare for the decisive battle. The one thing he understood from all the Toad arguments, maybe the stone did not feed on blood or souls or rage. It fed on empathy. It fed on the pain he felt when he put an end to another being's existence. Even if that other being was a raven intent on killing him, if he could find peace. Yes, that was the way to defeat the Iblistone. The mountains. He would go to the mountains. He could find peace there. Unfortunately, the mountains were not empty. There were ravens everywhere. No matter. He had to fight, yes, but he didn't have to be angry. Parry, dodge, slash, and breathe. Yes, focus on the rhythm, the dance of it, not on the blood or the raven's core as they died. Ah, it was working. He wasn't feeling those dark jolts of eldritch energy. He wasn't feeling the Iblistone. This chess was really awesome. See what I did there? This was definitely better than pulling yourself up in a bucket. The stone was still silent. His mind was his own, and his heart too. He bore them no ill will, these ravens. They were doing their job. They were expressing their nature. Dance, whirl, parry, jab, and breathe. It was all so simple, wasn't it? Something was missing. He didn't feel truly at peace. Wait. Wasn't this near where Calaveras lived? The sage would help him. presence by the Sky River's core had given Reynardo enough power to challenge the Imperial fleet. But what Reynardo was seeking was inner peace. The rebellion was on the verge of extinction, and it would have to wait. At the end of the mountain path, he found the wise Calaveras in his workshop. "Do you fix souls or only artifacts?" he asked the sage.
Does your soul need fixing?
Asked the sage. "I've been killing a lot of ravens lately," he told the sage.
You're a fox,
said Calaveras.
And to kill birds is part of your nature. You should take joy in it. I mean, I might as well worry about eating flies. Would you like a fly?
It was true. That's what he had forgotten. Farfarer cut through the clouds. The air had never felt so sweet since he was a child. There it was, the dreaded Imperial fleet. He could smell wet hemp ropes ahead, wood and tar and ravens. Even the fleet smelt good, somehow. He was ready. He was ready. Reynardo had it all squared away in his head. He would kill the Emperor. Isengrim III had begun well, but he had gone mad. He was trying to invoke the lost gods by means of dark, blasphemous rituals. That was a secret. But the victims had spoken to Reynardo. The ghosts had spoken. No. No anger. Reynardo could not afford anger. It was empowering the crystal in his sword. That made him stronger, but it clouded his mind. He would not be a hero. A hero strives. Reynardo would just be one with everything. The Emperor would die, and the wheel would turn, and all would be restored without rancor, without sorrow, without pain. Right into the middle of the fleet. It was a glaring weakness in the defense. Reynardo had always wanted a flying carpet. This was more like a flying tabletop, but it would do. The more he thought about it, and he had so much more time to think about it now that he was not worrying about the battle, killing the Emperor would not change anything. Another would take his place. Perhaps Zenobia. Perhaps the Speaker of the Rebel Council, and power would corrupt them too, and death would make grief, and grief would lead to hatred. He must lead by example. Reject the violence. Reject the desire to create violence. But how?
Go back to school,
said Reynardo, in your next life. Finally, he came to the Emperor's ship. The path behind him was strewn with dead ravens. The path to enlightenment. His mistake, he realized, was trying to change the world. The world would spin and the wheel would revolve whether he strove against it or not. What he had to do was nothing. He had attained enlightenment. He sat down, adopted a full lotus position, and began to meditate. And all around him, the warriors stopped fighting too. They knew. They could feel his enlightenment. They gave up. No, just kidding. The nearest raven stabbed him with a sword and then chopped off his head. I might not have thought this through properly. Thought Reynardo's head as it rolled around the deck and died. He should go back to some of the choices he'd faced before. Maybe there were new paths that had opened up, like those doors he was opening up all over the map that took him to new treasures and around his enemies. And he hadn't learned anything new this time. He'd done the same thing twice, yet expected a different outcome.